There are at least two giant mysteries in our world. What is consciousness, and how do we exist in the classical world of physics? Solid, stable matter, and time, and the weird quantum world of subatomic physics, where everything is just energy and bonds. Nothing is solid. There is no gravity, no time or space, but everything is apparently connected in the quantum universe. Both have remained behind a curtain of full comprehension. But now there are audacious new ideas that both consciousness and quantum are connected. At first glance, that looks like woo-woo bollocks to me. Looking for answers from the least two understandable parts of science and connecting them. It's obviously shite. But hang on. Greater minds than mine have seen a connection between consciousness and quantum. So today, viewers, let's ask the big question. What is consciousness and how does it connect to the quantum world? Let's explore what's going on and look at a demonstration of consciousness and the timeless world of quantum physics in action. I start here with a young Israeli traveling to the US to join a new team in the San Francisco Bay Area called Stanford Research Institute. SRI was established to answer the hard questions that government or industry might have. Post-World War II, SRI worked with everyone, from Technicolor looking at the latest film to Procter & Gamble making a better detergent. SRI hired the best chemists, the best physicists, all with the ability to look outside of the box of washing powder to solve government and industry's perplexing questions. Russell Targ, Hal Puthoff and others suggested an amazing resource for the government and security services: remote viewing. That program offered a service to see into distant secret places, pinpoint distant underground laboratories, solve crimes and locate missing people or things such as crashed aircraft. The young Yuri Geller was encouraged to join Targ and his team because of a cooperation between Israel's Mossad and the CIA security service. Geller was rigorously tested at SRI and demonstrated an uncanny ability to remote view. I always assumed that this project located distant places and things, but in fact, its main method of working was seeing through time.
This film describes a 5-week investigation conducted at Stanford Research Institute with Uri Geller.
For you today, here's a clip from an original SRI training film. Geller is sat on a sofa alongside Targ and Puthoff and another man. In a metal box with a closed lid, a dice is shaken. Geller is asked what number on the dice after shaking is facing upwards. As you can see, he gets it consistently correct. This clip claims with a probability of 1,000,000 to 1. Quite staggering.
Out of 10 tries in which he passed twice and guessed 8 times, the 8 guesses were correct, and that gave us a probability of about 1 in 1,000,000.
But let's look at this clip again, because I think it reveals a hidden secret.
Here is another double-blind experiment in which a die is placed in a metal box, both box and die being provided by SRI. The box is shaken up with neither the experimenter nor Geller knowing where the die is or which face is up. This is a live experiment that you see. Geller guessed that a 4 was showing. You will note that he was correct, and he was quite pleased to have guessed correctly.
I'm going to point out to you a technique that Russell Targ is using to encourage Geller to get the right answer.
The box is shaken up.
First the tin is shaken, then Geller states the number on the dice.
This is a live experiment that you see. Geller guessed that a 4 was showing.
But look what happens next.
You will note that he was correct, and he was quite pleased to have guessed correctly.
The tin is opened, confirming that Geller got the right number. And Russell Targ now praises Uri Geller using a technique called positive confirmation. And that possibly might reveal the true mechanism of remote viewing. So it's quite impossible for Geller to actually see the dice in the box. But when the box is opened in the near future, less than a minute, the number is revealed and Yuri gets affirmative confirmation. Is what you've just seen one possible answer to Uri Geller's special ability? Could it be working by Uri Geller looking into his near future and remembering in the future the positive confirmation? If so, we are seeing here the quantum effect of time travel, where a sophisticated, trained human brain can tap into the quantum timelessness that transcends our notion of time. But the idea that positive confirmation in the future was the mechanism of remote viewing was discussed in this paper. So what exactly does Russell Targ and Uri Geller think about confirmation and remote viewing? I don't know, but I'm certainly going to ask them. Hey everybody, this is me in the future. Filmmaking is temporal. I can dot forwards and backwards. So I did write to Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, and Uri Geller to ask them if confirmation might be one clue in making remote viewing through time more likely to work. So far, neither Russell Targ or Hal Puthoff have actually replied directly to me. If they do in the future, I will update you. But I did get a really interesting and long, detailed response about how remote viewing works inside Uri Geller's brain. And you will soon learn very insightful explanation in his own mind about how he can look through time. I feel a bit in two minds about telling you what Uri Geller told me, because it reveals Yuri in a new light. Uri Geller said that he was exposed to an alien flying saucer that landed in a garden in Israel when he was 6 or 7 years old, and using a laser beam implanted something in his brain. He went back to his mum's house where he discovered he could bend spoons. The alien implant as a child, according to Uri Geller, gave him all his powers. Now, I have a massive problem with that, Yuri, because often the alien card is disinformation. It's used by security services to hide the real truth. We've seen aliens, UFOs, and flying saucers often used as disinformation in many military exercises. So I'm assuming that Uri Geller, although he might personally believe that, if he does, is hiding the truth from us. I suspect that he somehow went through Israeli Mossad training to make his brain better, or he has an inherent ability that I think we all have to see through time temporal viewing. The problem is with flying saucer stories that's put out as disinformation by the military is as soon as you say it's a flying saucer, you effectively have closed all other lines of inquiries. The UFO community say, I knew it was aliens, that's the answer. When, of course, the security service know that, and they stop you meddling UFO investigators asking big questions that I and others actually should be asking. So, has Uri Geller actually got an alien implant in his brain? Well, he claims he has. This is a picture he sent me of a brain scan, and it seems to have an anomaly on the picture. But Yuri, I would want it removed and analysed. I don't think that's been done. And two, and this is a bit harsh, I would want to be a bit more open-minded and look at other possibilities of why me as Uri Geller has this ability. He definitely could see through the tin at the number on the dice. I think he was looking through time. And there's other examples in remote viewing where people predicted the present by looking at the future. I think that effect is emblematic of fascinating science. So in this film today, I'm going to discuss the science, not alien implants that closes the case, but what might really be going on with quantum physics and our classic reality, and how our brains might really work. Back to today, and consciousness is being seriously studied. Other examples of a consciousness connection to the quantum universe have emerged in MRI scanning, and the black art of anesthesia, losing consciousness for medical purposes, might reveal physical structures in our brain that induces consciousness and unconsciousness. So that's the end of my research. I need help. So I've reached out to Professor Mike Wiest. I hope he can pull back the quantum curtain inside our brain. Yeah. What an honor to have Dr. Mike Wiest from Wellesley College, who's a neuroscientist. And we can talk today about consciousness and this amazing thing that's happening right now. Is there a explanation for consciousness inside us with this new research? So, Dr. Mike, the big question. In your view, I mean, how would you actually describe what is consciousness from a personal point of view and from a science point of view?
Yeah, this is something people can get stuck on because we don't have a rigorous definition of consciousness. But that is not a reason that it is not a scientific topic, and it's not a reason that we can't make progress on it. So first, to say what I mean by the word consciousness, for me, it's synonymous with the word experience. So it is to be distinguished from other concepts like self-consciousness or self-awareness. That's something fancier. It's not what I'm talking about. By consciousness, I just mean the ability to have feelings, thoughts, and so if you can feel pain, you qualify for this concept that I'm talking about. You don't have to have fancy ideas about yourself and stuff like that. It's just sensation, essentially, or perception is what I'm talking about. Now, in terms of a definition, we don't have a rigorous definition of what it is because we don't understand it yet. But that is not a reason to sort of rule it out. People will take an attitude of you can't define it. That means you literally don't know what you're talking about. And so can't we do something more worthwhile with our time? This is bollocks. But that's not a rational viewpoint because this happens repeatedly in science. When we started studying charge, we didn't know what it was. We didn't have a rigorous definition. It's just whatever it is that makes these things push on each other. Right. And then now we have a sophisticated theory of electromagnetism, but arguably we still don't know what charge is at bottom. Yeah. We just have a way of pointing to it and talking about it. So similarly with consciousness, we're at the beginning of understanding this phenomenon. It is unreasonable to require that we already have a sophisticated, rigorous definition and theory about it. So I'm admitting we don't have such a definition, but pointing out that does not mean we can't start talking about the phenomenon.
Oh, we have to talk about it. We are conscious beings. Is consciousness, in fact, a side effect, or is of that kind of connection to something which is bigger? Are we, as beings, and maybe all salient creatures, somehow connected to that world because of the word consciousness?
In a word, I think the answer is yes, but it's easy to get carried away with this. For me, the essential difference between quantum physics and classical physics is not the randomness, which is what you usually hear about first, the randomness or indeterminacy, but rather the holism, the irreducible holism that people refer to with the technical term non-locality. Right. That is what is completely absent from classical physics. And for me, that is where the relation to consciousness is most natural and obvious. That is, our each conscious experience is a combination of multiple sensory features like sounds and colors and shapes, but I experience it as a whole. And if I think that holistic experience is helping to guide my behavior and, tell me to take my hand out of the fire and stuff like that, it cannot be a classical state because classical states are completely reducible to infinitesimal parts pushing on their neighbors. Whereas in quantum physics, there are irreducible wholes like our conscious experiences. And so this is maybe skipping ahead, but
No.
the way to make fun of this hypothesis that I'm defending, that consciousness is a quantum phenomenon, the way to make fun of that is to say, well, consciousness is mysterious and quantum physics is mysterious, so they just stick them together and declare them both solved.
Right.
But that's not fair, because what quantum physics has is exactly what is missing from our classical theories of consciousness, exactly what is needed to account for consciousness. And so it's not jamming two mysterious things together. It's finding a relevant feature in one of them that explains something about the other, namely the holism of quantum mechanics gives us a way to understand the holism of our conscious states.
And it's just absolutely, we live in such an amazing time. I mean, if we can actually discover both the secrets and unpick some of the quantum mysteries, which are still being explored, and understand our feeling of wholeness. I think that's an excellent word. By connecting these two disparate theories, wow. Yeah, no, I think we will look back at 2024 and this research that's been going on for a few years now and say, I think they're onto something. I think we live in this world where we are aware of something that's going on, and possibly the answer to why we're conscious, and rather than just a collection of subatomic particles, but we are in the far field or the classical physics world, is maybe because there is a structure that can connect with the subatomic world. Wow.
I think so. And I do think, this is a very unpopular at present hypothesis. It's a fringe idea, but I think we are going to turn the corner pretty soon, because for decades we've mostly had theoretical arguments, and people have theoretical prejudices against this idea. But now the experimental evidence is starting to catch up with the theoretical arguments. And so one that you just brought up is these MRI experiments out of Dublin. So that was Kerskens and Perez. They basically set their MRI machine to unconventional settings in order to try to isolate quantum states in the living human brain, quantum entangled states, to be a little more precise.
Right.
And they found a signal. So they recorded a signal that looked like the heartbeat. So if you put electrodes across your chest, you can record the heartbeat. It's called a heartbeat evoked potential. They put the people in the scanner and changed the settings so it's not doing what you normally do with an MRI scanner. And they saw a copy of this heartbeat evoked potential, but it's not an electrical recording. And so they argued they should not have been able to see that by the normal signal that people think they're seeing with MRI. And they argued that it was evidence that there is a quantum entangled state in the human body and brain that was interacting with the spins of the protons in the water that are manipulated by the MRI machine. My background is in physics, but I confess I'm not able to say for certain whether their argument is absolutely correct. But someone else wrote a paper saying they don't believe it, but they were not able to offer a classical physics explanation for the signal they saw. So at present, there's no alternative explanation besides that there's a quantum state, a macroscopic entangled state in our brain. And moreover, they found that the fidelity of the signal correlated with whether the person was awake or asleep. The person fell asleep in the scanner and they saw it degrade. And they also had people do working memory tasks and saw that the fidelity of the signal correlated with working memory. So it that further evidence suggests it's not just in there, it's related to our consciousness, this quantum state.
I mean, do you think, as a neuroscientist, that we are aware of this quantum state in our normal everyday lives? Does it enter our consciousness? Does it affect us? Is it present in an everyday person?
Yes, I think it is our consciousness, or more precisely, it is the substrate of our consciousness. It's a
Right.
physical process, a quantum process happening in our brain, and our consciousness is a property of that process. That's how I see it.
The other aspect of consciousness is being unconscious. Do you like to talk about a bit about anesthesia? I mean, it seems to me that revealing the brain function through injury or affecting a brain might actually reveal its true function. What's your
Absolutely.
views on anesthesia?
Absolutely. We've learned a lot about the brain by seeing what happens when it gets broken in various ways.
Right.
Anesthesia is amazing because it does not break the brain. It turns it on and off. It turns it off and on without breaking it, which is amazing. And people do not fully understand how it does that. And it's quite specific to consciousness. It doesn't turn off, your breathing, your heartbeat. Your heartbeat's working off the same kind of electrical signals as your brain. Those don't get turned off. The electrical signals in your brain don't get turned off. They slow down a little bit, but it's almost like it's specific to consciousness. And yes, I think it does give us very strong clues about consciousness, anesthesia, that is. It didn't have
Yeah.
to, but it seems that it has turned out that way. So, what's remarkable about anesthetics, specifically the gases, anesthetic gases that they
Yeah.
call volatile anesthetics, is they're relatively simple molecules. One of them is even an element. The element xenon
Oh yeah.
is an anesthetic gas, uh, and these molecules are relatively simple. They are chemically inert. So unlike most drugs, they
Oh,
don't, fit lock and key
right.
into some binding site. They bind promiscuously in lots of places, and they are what's called hydrophobic. So they don't like water. They go into oily parts of proteins and tissues. And an old result from around the time when they were first discovered is that the effectiveness of these different molecules in putting us to sleep or unconscious is directly predicted by how soluble they are in something like olive oil. So it's a
Right.
physical property
Right.
rather than a chemical property like
Right.
regular drugs.
Right.
Now, the mainstream understanding of how anesthetic works is that they work on ion channels in our neurons. So ion channels are little proteins in the membranes of our brain cells that open and close to let electrically charged particles in and out, and that's how we send electrical signals to think and to
Yeah.
move our muscles and to talk or to do anything, basically. Um, and so most of the field of anesthesia focuses on the ion channels and thinking that
Yeah.
anesthetics somehow mess with the ion channels and change the firing of action potentials, the electrical signals, in such a way that different parts of the brain become relatively disconnected, and that's what makes you go unconscious. However, that viewpoint does not explain this remarkable fact. It's called the Myerton-Overton correlation
Oh, you're right.
that shows how the solubility of chemicals in olive oil predicts how effective they will be as anesthetics.
Right.
The ion channel viewpoint doesn't predict that because different
Ah.
animals have different combinations of different ion channels,
Uh,
but the effects of these anesthetic gases are very similar across animals.
all
Even
right.
more remarkably, they work on plants and single-celled animals that don't have neurons, don't even have neurons. They
Ah,
wiggle around. You can reversibly stop them wiggling around
yeah,
with the same chemicals that put us to sleep reversibly. So I was saying the mainstream viewpoint is
yeah,
that they work on ion channels to change the electrical signaling,
yeah.
but an alternative viewpoint, and the one I favor and the one my recent work supports, is that
Right.
volatile anesthetics act on microtubules, which are proteins inside of
Right.
cells, inside of
Right.
neurons, but all cells, and those are the main target rather than the ion channels. And so one could so I have some evidence that
Ah,
anesthetics do act on microtubules to put rats unconscious.
right.
Given that result, it doesn't prove that microtubules are the substrate of consciousness. It does not prove that
Right.
they are
Right.
quantum mechanical in any way, but it does start to suggest that they might be the substrate of consciousness. And anyway, anesthetics are working on them to make us unconscious.
Wow.
And so once we identify microtubules as a possibility or a candidate for the
Hmm.
substrate of consciousness,
Yeah.
then we can look at evidence, how would we understand anesthesia working if
Right.
these are just operating according to classical physics,
Right.
doing stuff that everybody already knows they do, or the alternative viewpoint is that these
Hmm.
microtubules are designed in such a way that they
Hmm.
are very suitable for
Yeah.
hosting these quantum states that I say are necessary for our consciousness. And so this is where we get to the
Great.
proposal of Hammeroff and Penrose. They
Ah,
Hammeroff is the
fantastic.
one who proposed, or
The anesthesiologist. Yeah.
right.
Anesthetist. Yeah.
He actually, even people before him in the late 60s proposed that microtubules might be the target of anesthetics, but that suggestion was more or less ignored with the
Hmm.
focus on ion channels. And then Stuart Hammeroff made it again in the 80s
Right.
and 90s.
Ah.
People still didn't believe him. But now I think the evidence is starting that people are becoming frustrated with how they can't explain anesthesia in terms of ion channels. And so
Right.
maybe along with the other quantum evidence that we can also talk about in microtubules,
Oh.
people might start reconsidering their theoretical biases.
Oh, interesting times. Have you come across living matter that doesn't have microtubules that can't be anesthetized? I mean, that's just me being steam engine
No,
science.
that's a great question.
But you say mammals and living plants and things
Right. Everything. I think viruses may
right.
not have them. But there's a quote from Claude Bernard, who was a 19th century physician who was one of the early pioneers of anesthesiology. And he said,
Oh yeah.
what is alive must sense and can be anesthetized.
Yeah,
The
we should do
rest,
it. Right.
the rest is dead.
The rest are dead anyway. I know, but I wonder, talking a bit of woo-woo science, that we aren't the only conscious entity in this far-field world of big stuff. That it's quite possible that consciousness might exist in ways that or self-awareness might exist in physics or in other physical properties. A lot of people have said that high energy plasma states, I know it's probably not your field, but I'm just going to mention it, tend to, when approached, say, by a person or an aircraft or something, this classic unknown anomalous phenomenon tends to take evasive action, which is evasive action, uh, you know, a viewpoint, an example of something that is conscious of its environment. I don't expect an answer. Well, have you any views on that?
So
Other
you're asking
things
about,
apart. So, I mean, is it possible that we as humans aren't the only conscious entity, around, or mammals or living things? Could it be extendable?
absolutely. So first of all, I'm not going to limit it to humans. I don't think that's defensible in this day and age.
Right.
Absolutely, mammals are conscious, in my view.
Yeah, yeah.
You can always find people who will argue against that, but in my view, that's not a serious point of view.
No, no.
So I think my rats are conscious. I think they can feel pain, and again, that's
Yeah,
what I mean by consciousness. Um, so I think the rats, and so then we go down to like insects,
right.
um, and fish and so on. Fish are still vertebrates like us.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's a matter of opinion as we go farther from ourselves.
Mm,
And once we have a real theory, we'll be able to give real answers to these. Right now, it's
right,
opinion, but I tend to think it goes pretty far down, and that our consciousness is just an elaboration of something that was already there in biology, even
right.
in single cells, because single cells have the microtubules, and they do avoidance, and if you look at them under the microscope, they're running around like little
Right.
dogs and crabs and fishes. They don't look
Yeah,
like just collections of molecules that don't know what they're doing.
right.
And as I said, they can be anesthetized by the same chemicals as us, and they look purposeful.
Yeah,
And they use their microtubules for all sorts of integrative and
yeah.
functions, like in cell division. The microtubules are the conductors of that beautiful dance, and they're
Oh,
involved
right.
in the movements of the
Mm-hmm.
filopodia and
Yeah.
pseudopodia and cilia on
Mm-hmm.
single-celled creatures. And there's even evidence that microtubules are used by some animals as a primitive eye to detect
Right.
electromagnetic radiation and where it's
Vibration.
coming from. And I mean,
Yeah.
single cells do this. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
one researcher said, referred to it as are microtubules the nerves of single cells? And
Right.
essentially, I think they are.
Wow.
You can get some
Right.
forms of learning even in single-celled organisms.
Right.
So, I'm not saying they have thoughts like us or anything like that, but our
Right.
consciousness, I think, developed from more primitive forms of
And
consciousness,
go up. Right.
and it may go all the way down.
Oh,
And yes, in
I
this
think it's
viewpoint,
massive. Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to ask about Penrose and Hameroff's theory.
Yeah, of course.
You can,
Well,
you, we can,
first of all, let's talk. We live on a farm here in France, and certainly our goats are conscious, but that's a small goat. Have you worked with birds? There's a mythology, and a lot of people have talked about this kind of hierarchy of creatures in the world. And in a spiritual sense, birds are often seen as communicators. And there's physical systems in some birds. We have pigeons who are very good at navigating in things. And there's a theory that that bird brains might have a more sensitive microtubule or conscious state. Have you worked with our avian friends?
no, I haven't myself.
Right.
I've read a bit about, I think some of them have a magnetic sense that we
Yeah.
probably don't have, and it might have a quantum mechanism. I don't know much at all about that,
All right.
and I don't know if it would be microtubules.
Right.
I mean, I think birds are probably conscious,
Yeah.
and they may use a quantum effect for something that we don't, for navigation. And plants apparently use a quantum effect
All
for
right.
photosynthesis,
Right.
although it's not very comparable to what we're talking about in the brain. So what I've said so far is that an argument that we need a quantum model of consciousness to
Right.
account for the holism of our conscious states.
Right.
That people refer to that as the binding problem
Okay.
in psychology or neuroscience. How do the features that we experience get bound into this single
Mm.
unified experience? Hameroff and Penrose's proposal goes beyond that. Not just saying there's a quantum substrate and it's microtubules, but also identifying our conscious moments with collapse of the wave function in quantum
Right.
physics.
Right.
So you've perhaps heard about how in quantum physics things can get into a superposition
Yeah.
of classically incompatible
Yeah.
states like alive and dead or here and
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And then at some point, they say when a measurement occurs,
Or yeah.
it chooses one or the other.
Right.
But the problem is we don't know what a measurement is in quantum physics, and that's called the measurement problem. So one approach to solving that is to say the process of measurement is a real physical
Right.
process in the real
Right.
world where the world goes from being in an indeterminate
Yeah.
state to choosing what it's going to be in
Right.
actuality. And so that's those kind of theories are called objective collapse theories or objective reduction theories because they're saying the collapse is something that really happens in the objective world. It's not just a feature of our learning about the system or something. It's not just about
Okay.
our knowledge. It's something real happening.
Right.
The real origin of time in the physical world is
Is
the
the
objective
collapse.
collapse of the wave
Right.
function, which generates something happening. Each time it happens, it goes from something considering happening to
Yeah.
actually happening. And so that happens everywhere. Penrose has a specific scheme
Yeah.
or theory about how that collapse happens,
Right.
and it's related to gravity. And so when people see the word gravity in a paper about consciousness, many people immediately shut down and think it's bollocks and shite.
Right.
But it's not really saying there's black holes in our brain or anything like that.
No.
His viewpoint is just when enough mass gets into a superposition, it becomes unstable. You can't be both here and there at the same time if you're big. That's
Right.
his basic argument. And so he's got a way of making that into a mathematical formula that says when the system will
Yeah.
collapse.
Oh.
And he can apply that to microtubules and say how many microtubules would have to be coherent in this state to get collapses on the order of fractions of a second, like changes in our consciousness. But so in that picture, they're associating consciousness not just with a quantum state, but more specifically with the collapse of the wave function.
Right. Oh, that's
And what
great.
they get beyond solving so I argued for a quantum model because it will solve the binding problem, a
Right.
crucial problem in consciousness studies.
Yeah.
But by adding their extra bits on, what they get is an explanation for our psychological arrow of time, which is not there in any classical theory because all of classical physics is reversible, symmetric, going backwards
Right.
and forwards. You get the arrow of time in real physics and in the psychological arrow of time.
Right.
Gets explained, gets accounted for. And you also get something else which we haven't discussed and which may be more controversial, but Penrose makes an argument. And also the philosopher John Searle has made an argument that our understanding is more than just an algorithm. And so
Great.
if you
Yeah.
identify, and so he's got Penrose has an argument based on Gödel's theorems from math.
Yeah.
Searle has his Chinese room argument that you may have encountered, or I can tell you about it if we have
Right.
time, or I can send it to you. But basically, those both are arguments that our understanding
Right.
is not just a computer program, not just an algorithm, not
Right.
just a sequence of steps. There's something non-algorithmic about it. And in the Hameroff-Penrose theory, that is accounted for by identifying our consciousness with the wave function collapse because that is also non-algorithmic, unpredictable.
So, Dr. Wiest, tell us about what you're working on currently.
Sure. So I'm a behavioral neurophysiologist. So what I normally do is implant rats with arrays of microelectrodes to measure their neural activity while they're doing different kinds of sensory discrimination tasks.
Okay.
But recently I did some anesthesia experiments to ask questions, to test a hypothesis about the molecular target of our anesthetic gas. It's called isoflurane. It's one of these gases that's also used for human surgeries, and it makes mice and rats unconscious as well. I use them for my I use isoflurane for my implantation surgeries to implant arrays of electrodes in their brains. But for this recent study, it was relatively simple. We were just measuring how long it took our rats to fall asleep, so to speak, or fall unconscious under our isoflurane gas. And then we injected them with a drug that binds to microtubules called epithylone B. It's used against cancer. So there's a bunch of these microtubule drugs that are used against cancer because microtubules are involved in cell division, and cancer is runaway cell division. So these microtubule stabilizing drugs are used against cancer. But we got one of these kinds of drugs that gets into the brain called epithylone B. And we found that if we gave it to our rats, they were a little bit resistant to the isoflurane gas, to the anesthetic. And so we inferred that the EPO-B is binding to the microtubules and getting in the way of the anesthetic, and that's why it took them longer to fall unconscious. And so we infer the anesthetic binds to microtubules as part of how it makes rats unconscious.
Oh, congratulations. That's amazing work. Where can my eminent viewers read about your work? I mean, we need to catch up on you.
Well, this paper that I was just describing was published in eNeuro. It's freely available. So you can just Google my name and isoflurane or something like that, or microtubules, and you should find that paper freely available as a PDF. Open access.
No, that's great. Oh, thank you very much for talking to us today. I think it's
my pleasure.
You've touched on so many confirmative and interesting topics. You've been fair, honest, open about science, and your science as a neuroscientist touches both physics and biology. I think we're on the cusp of some big revelations. I mean, there's going to be spanner in the works, but as we go down this line, but I really think that possibly we're generally onto something here. If there's any fascinating viewer questions, we'll have you back.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, that was really interesting. Thank you, Dr. Wiest. Really fascinating discussion on microtubules and the quantum world. Dr. Wiest made something very clear to me, that it's not necessarily true or a fact of physics that in the quantum realm there is no time, space, or gravity. We just don't know. Now, as a non-physicist, it seems to make sense to me. The relationship of space, time, and gravity in this classical world is the most fascinating thing. The principle is that mass bends space-time. So bent or distorted space-time produces the effect of gravity, a gravity well, by mass distorting space-time. Now, in the quantum world, I am not a physicist. I don't think there's mass. So that if there's no mass, you can't affect space-time. The quantum realm appears to be just interconnected energy. What do I know? And it's only when the wave function collapses, meaning that something pops into solid state existence in the classical world, that time starts, and that wave function collapse produces mass by producing a stable atom, which clump together and form a weight or a mass, bending space-time and causing gravity. That's my simplistic understanding of what's going on. But the big take-home point about consciousness research is, can we, as humans and other creatures, connect to the timeless quantum world? And are there experiments to prove that that might be possible? Right here, right now, we're on the cusp of discovery. When we fully understand how we interface with the quantum world, it will change everything. The truth is out there.